Jose, good morning. Good morning. I'm sorry that I cannot be there with you in person, but at least if we can't learn together in person, at least it's a great chus to be able to join you virtually. So today's daf is Samech Gimel 63, and we are picking up Emir Hashem at the Mishnah on Samech Beis Amud Beis. Remember, again, continuing in the discussion regarding an Eved who becomes a Nazir. So as we learned in the previous Mishnah, when an Eved Kenani becomes a Nazir, so the master does not have the ability to be Mefer, the neder, but he does have the ability to suppress the neder. So therefore the Mishnah says as follows. Avraham mikeneged panav. Here's the case. Eved becomes a Nazir and then he runs away from the master. So the shaila is, what is his level of obligation, or what's the impact of his neder naziros upon him when he has already run away from the master, or during the time that he is absent from the master. So Meir says, lo yishta. Rabbi Meir says he cannot drink. He cannot drink. Okay? Rabbi Yossi says he can drink. So remember again, we're talking specifically, Eved became a Nazir, then ran away from the master. In that period when he is away from the master, what level of restriction does he have? Rabbi Meir says he can't drink wine. Rabbi Yossi says he can drink wine. What's going on over here? So says the Gemara, say that they are arguing regarding the principle of Shmuel. Because what does Shmuel say? Damar Shmuel, Hamafkir Avdo Yotza Lecherus. If a person makes his Eved Hefker ownerless, so the Eved goes free. Now, what does Hefker have to do with this? So the Rush fills in the blank over. The Rush says, Hefker. The Rush says that since we're dealing with a case where the Eved ran away, the assumption is that once the Eved runs away, the master really despairs of ever being able to go ahead and recapture the Eved, and therefore essentially the Eved becomes Hefker. The Eved becomes ownerless. Eved becomes ownerless. So therefore, again, that the Gemara explains is the connection over here. So therefore, maybe what's happening is like this. So let's just put the pieces together. Eved goes in and takes a neder nazirus. So remember again, we saw before that when the Eved is under the purview of the master has the ability to suppress the neder. Now, Eved ran away. So the shaila now is, when he's in this state of being away from the master, what level of obligation or restriction does he have? So Rabbi Meir says he can't drink wine. Rabbi Yossi says he can drink wine. So the Gemara is suggesting maybe what they're arguing about is the statement of Shmuel. Shmuel holds that when you're mafkir in Eved, right? You make an Eved hefker, he goes free, and he doesn't even need a document of emancipation. Now, why is this like a case of hefker, our case? Because the assumption over here is that when the Eved runs away, the master really doesn't have high hopes of getting him back. So the Gemara suggests maybe Rabbi Meir is like the Shmuel. Rabbi Meir holds of Shmuel, and therefore Rabbi Meir holds that when an Eved runs away, the master essentially gives up hope of ever recovering him, which effectively means that the Eved becomes free. Well, if the Eved becomes free, he's obligated to observe his neder nazirus, and therefore again he can't drink wine. Rabbi Yossi Leslie, this Shmuel, versus Rabbi Yossi, who doesn't hold of Shmuel. Rabbi Yossi holds no, the master doesn't give up hope of getting him back, and therefore halacha l'maisa, he's still considered to be under the dominion of the master, and therefore his neder nazirus is still suppressed, and therefore halacha l'maisa, he has the ability to drink. To which the Gemara says, no, that's not it. The Choli Ames of the Shmuel, both say Shmuel's concept is a fact that is accepted halacha l'maisa. Namely, again, that if you make your Eved hefker, ultimately the Eved goes free without a document of emancipation. That's not the machlokes. So what's the machlokes? What is incredible? The man do Amar Yishta, the opinion that holds that the Eved could drink once he's run away, that's Rabbi Yossi. He holds sof mehader hadar. The Eved's going to come back. He's going to come back. Whether he's going to come back on his own or the master is going to find him, he's going to come back. Let him drink wine while he's on the run. This way, again, at least he does not become physically diminished. In other words, the Eved is going to come back. Whether he comes back of his own volition or his master captures him, he's going to come back. We don't want him to come back in a physically compromised state. We want him to be ready to work. So let him drink. Let him drink while he's on the run. This way, again, he keeps up his health. He keeps up his sustenance a little bit. Fine. Therefore, it's in the best interest of the master to let him drink. Listen to this. But the opinion who says that he should not drink, savar lehave leitzara. So the opinion that says that he shouldn't drink, Rabbi Meir says, no, don't let him drink. Because if he can't drink wine, then ultimately, again, he's going to have tsar. He's going to have pain. He's going to have discomfort. Why? And therefore, and if he has discomfort, ultimately, again, he'll come back to the master. In other words, deprive him of wine And that deprivation ultimately will send him back to the master. Because like from the Eved's perspective, what's freedom without the ability to drink a little bit of wine? And therefore, again, Allah Chamaisa, if he can't drink wine, he's going to come back to his master. Therefore, Rabbi Meir says, don't let him drink, because this will ensure he comes back to his master. And Chavra, I'll just tell you, it's such a profound Musar Haska if you think about it. Here, right, the guy's an Eved. He's a slave. Right? And as much as, again, you have to treat your slaves humanely and there's a whole code of conduct, but he's still an Eved. He doesn't have autonomy, he doesn't have freedom. And now he runs away. He has a shot at his own freedom. So yet, what are we saying? If there's tsar, if there's pain, or not pain even, it's not even pain, it's discomfort. If it's uncomfortable, he'll come back to servitude. So let me get this straight. The guy's a chance of freedom, but because freedom is a little bit uncomfortable, he'll go back to servitude. And the answer is yes. It's exactly the way that we as human beings work. Give a person a choice between an incredible destiny, incredible opportunity, but it comes with adversity, it comes with hardship, it comes with difficulty, versus a comfortable mediocrity. I think 9 out of 10 of us choose the comfortable mediocrity over the possibility of something so much greater, but that which is accompanied by adversity and hardship. It's human nature. We'd rather be comfortable and mediocre than be great and uncomfortable. And that's so sad and it's so tragic, because we so often miss out on so much in life because what drives us is comfort. It can't be comfort that drives us. It has to be accomplishment that drives us. It has to be actualization of destiny that drives us. It has to be, again, accomplishing great things which drives us. It has to be self-actualization which drives us. And yes, all of those things come with a certain level of discomfort. But in life, if I want to get anywhere, I have to be willing to accept the discomfort. I have to be willing to give up, so to speak, the metaphorical wine of mediocrity to be able to build something great for myself. And what an incredible lesson during Chodesh Nissan. This month, when we literally celebrate our newfound freedom, freedom comes with challenges. And this is why every single time our ancestors run into some type of problem in the desert, what's the first thing they say? Let's go back. Let's go back. You read it and it doesn't even make any sense. I will say it's the Gemara. It's Nazir, Samach Beis Amud Beis. Take away the wine from the Nazir, make him uncomfortable. Sorry, take away the wine from the Eved cannot, and he'll go back. He'll go back to his master. We saw it. We did this. Take away the perceived comforts in the desert. There's not water as much as you need. There's not meat. There's not this. Whatever happens, let's go back. Because give people a choice between what they perceive as comfortable mediocrity versus uncomfortable greatness, and most times we choose comfortable mediocrity. However, that's something we have to repudiate, something we have to resist, it's something we have to challenge and mamish work on ourselves not to do. And it's Chodesh Nissan, and this is the month to say, you know what? It's very nice to be comfortable and mediocre, but I want to be great, even if it means a little bit of discomfort. Top of Samech Gimel, we'll say 63a, the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says as follows. The Mishnah says, Nazir shegilach v'nodalo shutami. It's a very interesting case. This Nazir in question over here, he finished his neder nazirus. He's done. He took his haircut. He did everything. He brought his karbanos. Then he finds out that over the course of his nazirus, he had exposure to tumah. He had tumah exposure. So now the shaila is, but again, he's only finding out about this after his neder nazirus is already over. So the shaila now is, what does he do? What does he do? So with which the Mishnah explains, it depends on the nature of the tumah. Im tumah yedua soser. So ultimately, again, if it's a known tumah, then ultimately, again, that will deconstruct the nazirus. We'll have to start again. Again, what will have to start, we'll discuss, but it's soser. In other words, it demolishes, it deconstructs the nazirus. Now, tumah yedua means a tumah that people knew about. In other words, it was the source of tumah was a known source of tumah. Vim tumas tahom, but if it's tumas tahom, literally translated tumah of the deep, eino soser. It does not go ahead and deconstruct the nazirus. Now, the difference between tumah yedua and tumas tahom, tumah yedua ultimately, again, is people know about this source of tumah. Again, in our case, the Nazir was exposed to this tumah, he didn't know about the exposure, but ultimately the source of tumah was known. Versus tumas tahom is a totally unknown source of tumah. Totally unknown source of tumah. So interestingly enough, so again, if it's tumah yedua, it deconstructs the nazirus. If it's tumas tahom, it doesn't deconstruct the nazirus. Im ad shelo gilach, but if he finds out about his exposure to tumah before he took his haircut, benkach hu benkach soser. Either way, that'll go ahead and deconstruct the nazirus, which makes sense. In other words, if he finds out before the conclusion of the nazirus, then ultimately, again, knowledge that he was exposed to tumah ultimately deconstructs the nazirus. So we'll say, watch this. So the Gemara gives the Mishnah gives an example. Ketzad. We'll say, what's an example of tumas tahom? It's an example. Yarad litbal ma'ara. Supposed to listen to this. We'll call him Nazir, right? Nazir. He had tumas sheretz, right? He touched a dead rodent. Again, fine. Again, a Nazir can become tamei tumas sheretz, and it doesn't negatively impact him. So what happens? Now he goes to the mikvah. Let's say he goes into a cave, a body of water in a cave, which could serve as a mikvah. He goes to the mikvah to immerse for his tumas sheretz. V'nimtza meis tzaf api ma'ara. And then what ends up happening? They find the corpse floating by the entranceway of the cave. Now, what's the question? Now, this is actually a safek case. In this case over here, so it's possible that when the Nazir was in the cave, he was under the roof of the cave the same time as the corpse. Tumas ohel. So I will say, this is a case of tumas tahom. No one knew about this. But now you find his body floating by the entranceway of the cave. So the Gemara says, the Mishnah says, so we'll say in this case, ultimately again, he is going to go ahead and be tamei. Nimsa mishuka bekarka hama'ara. So I will say, so now listen to this. If it turns out that the body itself was embedded, mushuka means, let's say, it's sunk into the mud on the bottom of the cave, in the bottom of the pool of the cave. So Yarad Lahaker, if he went in there just to cool down. In other words, he didn't go in there to use a mikvah. It was a hot day. He went in there just to cool down, to put him to assume a little bit in the water. So what's that? Tar. Ultimately, again, he'll be tar. Litar mitumas meis. But ultimately, again, if he went in there to immerse because of tumas meis, in other words, say he was already tamei tumas meis, and he went into the cave for his tvila for tumas meis, tamei. He'll remain tamei. Why? Shecheskas tamei, v'cheskas tahar. Because I will say essentially, and this is actually very interesting, if you take a look at the Rush for just a moment, so the Rush comments over here, he says, Tamei, the suffix tuma birshos hayochid, sveko tamei, v'noda lo, in acha shegilach sosra dahainu tuma yudua va'afav. So, I'm sorry, that's actually wrong Rush. Mishuka bakarka ma'ara, so the Rush says over here, b'makom shetaval ubevadei nitma im nodalo acha shegalach ta. So again, in this case over here, you find out that there was a body. By the way, I just want to go back for just a second. The previous case was an example of tumas tahom, also combined with safek, right? In other words, Nazir went into the mikvah to immerse because of tumas sheretz. He comes out of the mikvah, then what do they find afterwards? They find the body floating by the entranceway of the cave. So what's the shaila? The shaila is ultimately, again, was the Nazir under the roof of the cave at the same time as the corpse? So first of all, I just want to point out what you have over here is suffix toma birshus hayochid, right? A suffix toma in a private domain, which number one generally is sveko tamei, right? Sveko tamei, and you also have tumas tom. So it's two things going on over here. Case number two, I will say, is, let's say they find the body buried, let's say in the ground of the cave, underneath the body of water. And so what happens? So I will say a person goes in to swim, to cool down, right? So that person ultimately, again, remains tahar. But a person who was tamei tumas meis, who went in there to go ahead and immerse, ultimately, again, he will remain tamei. The Mishnah's logic, shecheskas tamei, v'cheskas tahar tar. Okay, fine. Now, take a look at the Rush. So shecheskas tamei, v'cheskas tahar tar. Hai raglaim l'davar lav dafka dahachi gemiri hilchasa ela kilomer kitsas tam yish l'davar kevin b'cheskas tumas meis lo nitna. So we'll say what we're going to see is the Rush is explaining this from the beginning. This is all the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. All of this is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So halacha l'Moshe Sinai, number one, is that if a Nazir concluded his Nazirite vow, and then he found out afterwards that there was exposure to tumah, so what's his status? It depends. If it's tumah yedua, he'll have to repeat the neder nazirus. How much of it we'll discuss. If it's tumas tahom, he doesn't have to repeat. Why the distinction? Tumas tahom. Halach l'Moshe Sinai. Case number 2, they find out afterwards that there was a body buried on the bottom of in the dirt in the cave underneath the body of water. But we only find about this afterwards. So case number 1 is the guy went in there to swim. Case number 2 is the guy went in there to be metaher himself from tumas meis, an immersion. So what's the status? The tahar guy remains tahar. The tameh guy remains tameh. Now we'll say why. Once again, halacha l'Moshe Sinai about the laws regarding tumas tahom, unknown tumah that only becomes known after the fact. Okay, beautiful. Says the Gemara. So from where do we know this? I will say, so where do we know what? Where do we know? Now that's the thing. The Rush gave it away a little bit about tumas tahom being halacha l'Moshe Sinai, but the Gemara kind of wants to work through this. So menahani means, from where do I know about the case of where a Nazir finished his neder nazirus, right? He's totally done. And then what happens? He finds out afterwards that he had tumah exposure to tumas tahom, to unknown tumah. So now the Mishnah told me that has no impact on his nazirus. He doesn't have to repeat anything. Where do I know that from? Amar Elazar. So Elazar says, the Amakra, the chiyamos meis alav bepesa pitom. The pasuk, I will say, talking about a Nazir who becomes tameh, says as follows. The pasuk reads, if somebody will die in the presence of the Nazir suddenly. So it's talking about, again, a sudden, unplanned, unavoidable exposure to tumah. So the Gemara darshans, alav, what does it mean again? Alav. Literally, somebody died on him. What is on him? In a way that's clear to him. So what Rabbi is darshaning over here is that the laws of tumah exposure for a Nazir are alav, only when the tumah is absolutely clear and known. Reish Lakish says, no, Amakra, ki tameh lanefesh o b'derech rechoka. So this is actually very interesting. This is actually a pasuk by Pesach Shaindy. Remember again, the makeup Pesach, where the Torah speaks about, again, if a person can't offer Karban Pesach the first time, there's a makeup date. When are you permitted to avail yourself of the makeup date? If a person is tameh, right, ritually impure, therefore they can't offer the carbon, or too far away. So Reish Lakish dashins, ki derech. Tumah has to be like a pathway. Ma derech begilui, just like a path, a road is revealed. Af kol begilui. So to tumah, the only time it poses a problem is when it's revealed. Fine. So we'll say, so 2 different drushes. Ve'elah, what do you do about fine? Ve'elah hadisnan, ezohi tumas hatahom. What is the definition of tumas hatahom? Kol she'ena makira echad b'sof ha'olam. I would say it's tumah that literally no one knew about. No one in the entire world knew about this tumah. Aval makira echad b'sof ha'olam. But if you have a situation where one person in the world who knew about this tumah, ein zu tumas hatahom, then it's no longer called tumas hatahom. It's not called tumas hatahom anymore. To which the Gemara says, okay, so let's analyze this. Bishlam l'man damar ki derech. So we'll say, according to Reish Lakish, who says that tumah has to be like the derech, just like a derech is revealed, so too tumah has to be revealed at least to someone. But if it's not revealed to anyone, then it's called tumas hatahom, and it's not going to shter your nazirus. So ki derech shapir alaman damar de mechaberes lo. I will say, but ultimately, again, according to Rabbi Lazar, who says, no, the only time that tumah is a problem is when it's alav. It's known to him. So ki makira echad b'sof ha'olam I have. Who cares if someone knows about it? I didn't know about it. And if I didn't know about it, if the Nazir didn't know about it, then l'maisa, the person himself who's becoming tamei didn't know about it. That's called tumas hatahom. To which the Gemara says, v'su. Furthermore, hadisanya hamotzi meis mushkav l'rach b'shalach. Was an interesting case. Let's say you find that there was a corpse that was lying across the width of the road. So what's the whole chap when it goes across the width of the road? The whole chap over here is and I walked over that road. In other words, I walked the road, and then they find afterwards that there's a corpse along the width of the road. So I'll say, which means effectively, I walked over that corpse. So what's the halacha? B'tshuma tamei, b'nazir v'asiyas pesach tar. For truma purposes, ultimately I'll be tamei, but for nazir, for Karban Pesach purposes, I'm tar. So I will say, why? Maishna. In other words, I don't say why does that make any sense that there should be a decision? I will say, now here's a good example, ultimately again, of tumas hatahom. We could be talking about a case where they discovered a grave, no one knew there was a grave there, and it turns out the grave was along the width of the road. right? The length of the body was across the width of the road in a way that there's no way I didn't walk over it, but I didn't know it at the time. No one knew about it at the time. It was only discovered afterwards. So the Gemara says, ultimately, again, for Truma, I'm Tameh, but for Nazir Kran Pesach, I'm Tar. Why? Ella, Tumas Hatom Gemiri Gemara Gemirila. Rather, both say the Gemara answers, Halacha Maisa Tumas Hatom is a Halacha Moshe Misinai. It's Halacha Moshe Misinai. Rabbi say, what's the beauty of saying Halacha Moshe Misinai? It is what it is. If you look at the Rosh, so the Rosh says, V'kra Maisi Le'el Asmachta V'almaninu, V'dafka L'nazir V'osa Pesach Gemiri. So Rabbi say, here's what the Halacha Moshe Misinai says. The Halacha Moshe Misinai says that exposure to Tumas HaTahom, right, for both Nazir and for Pesach, that you only know after the fact, right? Because remember, again, all of this is you're discovering this after the fact, because if you discover it beforehand, then ultimately, again, it will prevent you from going ahead and doing anything. But Lamaisa, again, after the fact, Halacha Lamaisa, Tumas HaTahom does not impact Nazir, nor does it impact Carbon Pesach. So I will say this is the Gemara Gemira. This ultimately, again, is the Halacha L'Moshe Misinai of Tumas Tahom. So I will say, I'll just read to you. I just want to read to you the Rambam. So the Rambam here, I will say, this is in Perek Vav in Hilchos Naziros. So the Gemara says as follows. So Perek Vav, I'm sorry, I just want to read you the Halacha Tes Zayin. So I will say, here is the Halacha. Here is the Halacha. Nazir, Shegilach Taglachas Tara, V'achar Kach Noda Shetameh B'sochim Ein Nizro, Im Tumi Yedua Nithma Sasrakol, Umivi Karbanos. V'Metumas HaTahom Eino Soser, V'davar Zeh Halacha Mipia Kabbalah. So we'll say this is how the Rama paskins. Again, we're gonna remain hyper focused over here specifically when it comes to Nazir. We're gonna leave out Korban Pesach for now, but by focusing on Nazir, we'll say here's the halacha. If a Nazir finished his Naziros, right? Because that's the case he was doing, finished his Naziros, and he finds out that he was exposed to Tumas Tahom, it does not shter anything. Does not shter anything. Why? Halacha Moshe Misinai. Halacha Moshe Misinai. Beautiful. Let's go weiter. Im Achshelo Gilach, I will say the next case in the Mishnah was, let's say he discovers that he was exposed to Tumas Tahom before he took his haircut. So we'll say, so what's the halacha there? So the Mishnah said that halacha l'maisa soser. It would deconstruct in his ears and have to observe it again. To which the Gemara says, Man Tana, who is the opinion reflected over here? So the Gemara says, so Man Tana, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Eliezer, he da'amar taglachas ma'akeves. It's Rabbi Eliezer, because Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that I will say hair cutting, in other words, finishing out the actual calendrical duration of your Naziros is not enough. Rather, again, when is Naziros over? After haircutting. And therefore, again, if you find out even about Tumas HaTahom before haircutting, it's soser. It's only after the haircutting that ultimately, again, Tumas HaTahom will not impact you. To which the Gemara says, fine. So the Amar taglachas ma'akeves. So if you look at the Rosh says, Tamar taglachas ma'akeves milishtos yani v'litamar l'meisim. The Rabbanan the Amri ein taglachas ma'akeves mishenizrak hadam ein alav Toras Nazir. Old. So we'll say, so the idea over here is the fact that the Mishnah says, if he found out about Tumas Tahom before haircutting. Now remember again, before haircutting can mean he already offered his kabanos, and the zrika already happened, yet the Mishnah is saying everything is dependent on haircutting. So whose opinion is that? That's Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that the Neder Nazirus is only fully completed once the hair is cut. So the Gemara goes weiter. What about the following? Bryna bar Chama. Nitma b'soch malos v'nodalo la'achar malos. Shabbos say, what about the following situation? What happens if halacha l'maisa, the Nazir becomes tamei during the time of his Naziros, but it only becomes known ultimately again after the Naziros. So we'll see, if we look at the Rosh for just a moment. So the Rosh says over here, Bryna rachama nitma b'soch malos, tuma yedua, o b'kever tahom. So we'll say in this case over here, he became tamei, and it's interesting, the Rosh says whether we're talking about tuma yedua or tuma she'eina yedua, v'nodalo la'achar malos. Now we'll say, in this case over here, halacha l'maisa, he finds out after the calendrical Naziros is over, but before the haircutting. So we'll say, so the Gemara says as follows. So Mahu, what's that halacha? Basar Yediya Azlinon, do we go ultimately again when he finds out? And right, and the Yediya Achar Malosi, and therefore he's finding out after the calendrical duration is over. Oh, lo. Ultimately again, or not. Or maybe ultimately again, it's dependent on when on when the actual tumah occurred. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Ulamai. So we'll say, so ultimately again, so what's the ramifications of this? Lemistar. Ultimately, we'll say again, why does the question itself ultimately has a ramification? Ultimately, it has a ramification, halacha lemaisa, in terms of being soser, in terms of deconstructing the Nazirus, and potentially requiring him to start all over again. So let's analyze. Amar Rabba Tashma. Im ad shelo gilach. So what did the Mishnah say? Well, so that seems the answer from the Mishnah said if he finds out about tumah exposure before he took his haircut, benkach soser. Ultimately, again, he has to go ahead and what? He has to reobserve the Nazirus. So I'll say, what's the case? So we'll say, if we're talking about a case where he found out during the actual calendrical duration of the Nazirus, so ultimately it's Tzricha L'Meimar. So we'll say, is there any discussion that's necessary about this? So Ela Lav La'achar Malos. Rather, it must be that we'll say what's happening over here. He's finding out about the Tumah exposure after the calendrical duration of Nazirus is already over, but before he's cut his hair. So Gemara says, Shmamina. So what do you see from here? You see from here that halacha l'maisa, everything really is dependent on cutting the hair. So even if you're finding out after the calendrical duration, if the hair cutting has not yet been done, that would require the Nazir to go in and reobserve Nazirus. Shmamina. So fine. Now we answered that. But I still have another question. What's another question? Kula soser? Shiva soser. When we say, now here's what we know. If the Nazir finds out about Tumah, whether it's Tumah's Tahom or Tumah Yedua, it doesn't really matter. Even after the calendrical duration of the Nazirus. But before he cuts his hair, soser. So soser means that this Yediyah, this Tumah exposure, deconstructs the Nazirus and requires him to reobserve. We'll say, what's the Shaila? How much does he have to reobserve? Does he have to reobserve the entire duration of Nazirus? Or ultimately, again, Shiva? Or perhaps, again, only the 7 days necessary for purification from Tumas Meis? To which the Gemara says, Laman. So who are you asking according to? Ilema the Rabbanon. So we'll say, if it's according to the Rabbanon, Pshita de Kulasoser. So we'll say, if it's the Rabbanon, ultimately again, Halacha Lamaisa, the Rabbanon would say that this knowledge, since it's occurring before hair cutting, will deconstruct the entire Nazir. So we'll say, take a look at the Rush. So the Rush says, either Rabbanon benodelo achar malos kodim havas kabinosa. So we'll say, see, according to the Rabbanon, it's not really giluach, that's the big thing. It's really going to be the karbanos. But let's leave that aside. According to the Rabbanon, halacha lemaisa, you would have to go ahead and reobserve the entire Nazirus. Now we'll say, now the Rush points out, according to the Rabbanon, this would only be a din Rabbanon. Midah all you have to observe is another 7 days. But Midrabanan would make you observe the entire Ned Nazirus. According to Rabbi Eliezer, Kol achar melos shiva soser. Rabbi Eliezer is already of the opinion that halacha l'maisa. This is very interesting. Even though Rabbi Eliezer holds that the Nazirus is not complete until hair cutting, he holds that once you finish the calendrical duration of Nazirus, that time is locked in. And the maximum amount of time that you would be obligated to repeat would be another 7 days. Another 7 days. So if it's the Rabbanon, you would have to repeat everything. If it's Rabbi Eliezer, you have to repeat 7 days. Amar Lacha, so he would say, Hani mili, ki nitmar achamalos. So we'll say, Rabbi Eliezer, when do you have to repeat 7 days? That's after you become tamei, after the calendrical duration of Nazirus, before you cut your hair. Vahai lifnei malosu. But 1 second, remember, the case in the Mishnah, I will say, is where he's finding out that the tumah exposure took place during the calendrical duration of Nazirus. So the Gemara says, Dama, or the other possibility is, Shaindy hacha, the Yediyah achar malosi. On the other hand, maybe we'll say, maybe this case is totally different. Why? Because even though the exposure took place during the calendrical duration of Nazirus, Lamaisa, the Yediyah, the knowledge of the event, occurred after the calendrical duration. Omina, and I will say, let's try to answer the question from itself. Mina katani, let's look at the Mishnah. Benkach ubenkach soser. Ultimately, and what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says, benkach ubenkach. So in other words, if you find out that you had tumah exposure before the hair cutting, whether ultimately, again, it was tumas tahom or it was tumah yedua, soser. So we'll say, listen to this. Velo kamiflagi, and ultimately, again, and there's no machlokes. So we'll say, look at the Rush. So the Rush says, "Uminami diktani benkach ubenkach soser velo miflagi bein tuma shebesof malos tumah shela achar malos." So Ela Katani Soser Bistam Alma Din Echad Lahem. So we'll say the fact that the Mishnah does not make any kind of distinction ultimately again to tumah that took place during the Nazirus or tumah that took place during the calendrical duration or after the calendrical duration. Ultimately, rather it just says Stam Soser. Alma the Rosh says therefore Din Echad Lahem the Kemoshe Nodalo Achar Malos Al Tumah She'achar Malos Eno Soser Elazayin Hu Adin Nodalo Al Tumah Shelifnei Malos Shmamina De Basar Yadina Yadia Azlinan. So Rabbi said this is really interesting. So it turns out that halacha l'maisa really, when it says soser, the Rosh says, what the Gemara is saying over here is the Gemara according to the Rosh is explaining that really at most you're going to lose over here is 7 days. When we say soser, when the Mishnah says soser, so halacha l'maisa means you lose out on 7 days. You'll have to reobserve 7 days of Nazirus. Now the reason we're saying that is simply because since the Mishnah doesn't make a distinction whether the tumah exposure happened during the calendrical duration or after the calendrical duration. Instead, it just says soser, that tells us it's the same halacha. And therefore, what you're going to lose out on is 7 days. So therefore, it's incredibly important. So therefore, remember, case number 1 in the Mishnah was where the Nazir was finding out about his tumah exposure. When did he find out about it? After his neder nazirus was done. He already did his hair cutting. So in that case, what's the halacha? So there, the Mishnah said, if it's Tumah Yudua, Soser, Tumas Tahom, Eino Soser. Case number two, ultimately again, he finished the calendrical duration of the Naziros, but didn't yet do his haircut. Salach alamaisa, benkach u benkach. Benkach means Tumas Tahom and Tumah Yudua, same halacha, Soser. How much Soser? 7 days. 7 days. Apparently, 7 days is going to be your maximum exposure. Maximum exposure for this, or I should say, not exposure is the wrong word, the maximum makeup amount of time. Okay, let's go back to TORAH Rabbanan. We'll see another interesting Brysa. Again, we'll see the Rambam in just a moment as well. We're going to go back. I want to show you actually a few Rambams over here from... Okay, we'll come back. So we'll say TORAH Rabbanan. Hamotzi meis mutal l'rachba shal derech. So another interesting case. Person finds a mace, similar to what we saw before, I will say. The mace, right? It's discovered that there's a grave, and the mace is buried lengthwise across the width of the road. So I will say, and I traversed this road. So what's the halacha? The truma tameh. Ultimately, I passed this road. After I passed by, they discovered this corpse. So for truma, ultimately, again, I'm going to be tameh. Ubenazir va'oseh pesach tar. But for Nazir and for Korban Pesach, I remain tar. Rabbi will say again, this is the din of tumas tahom. The Medran word, will say, when is this so? She'ein lo makom la'avar. When there was no other place to go. And I will say, now what does that mean? In other words, where I know for sure that I passed over the grave, right? That's when I'm going to be tameh for truma purposes. I know with absolute certainty that I passed by, right? I passed by. He says, and therefore again, there's no way that I avoided tumas ohel. But if halacha l'maisa, there is a way across the road without having traversed the grave, then afla truma tar, then even for truma, ultimately again, I'm going to be tar. Fine. Which makes sense. In other words, it's a suffix. So if there was a way for me to go ahead and get across the road without going over the mace, then ultimately, again, I will be tahar. Fine, even for truma. So Medram, when is this true? Shematzo shalim. Furthermore, when else is this true? That it passing over this area, and then I found out after the fact that Allah Lamaisa there was a grave there that I'm tameh for truma. That's only when you found the corpse intact. Shematzo shalim. Aval meshubar or mefurak. But Allah Lamaisa again, if the corpse was broken or in pieces, afilu ein makom la'avar, even if the corpse, the length of the corpse went across the entire width of the road, chayshin and shemar bein prakin avar. So maybe I went in between the pieces. In other words, if the corpse is disjointed, then the Maisa, although the corpse stretches along the entire width of the road, maybe I passed by in between pieces of the corpse and therefore did not go ahead and encounter Tumas Ohel. But ultimately, again, if it was in a set grave, then ultimately, again, like in a tomb, then even if the corpse is broken apart, it's still tamei. Why? Ultimately, also because remember, the tomb essentially solidifies or makes the entire corpse into one mass of tumas mace, and therefore, again, if it's stretched the entire width of the road, I will be tamei. When is this so? When is this so? This is when I'm walking on foot. And I will say, now listen to this. Let's go back for just a second. Going back to the case where, let's say, the mace was in pieces. So if the mace is in pieces and not in a tomb, even if I walked right over, even for truma purposes, I could be tar, because there's a possibility that maybe I walked in between the pieces of the mace. When is that true? When I'm walking on foot? Aval ta'un, or rocho. But I will say, if I'm carrying a load, and I will say, if I'm carrying a load, the assumption is that the load extends outside of me, right, beyond me. So let's say, again, can you imagine I'm carrying something on my back and it extends out. So now, even if I myself didn't walk over the mace, my load presumably did hover over the mace, and then it contracts Tumas Ohel. And if my load contracts Tuma, I contract Tuma as well. So the Gemara says, Avalton or Rachel, or for that matter, again, I'm going on a wagon, and if I'm going on a wagon, also the wagon definitely passed over mace. Therefore, I'll be tamei. Why? Lefisha mahalich baraglov efshar lo shelo yiga v'shelo yasid v'lo yahil. So also because if I'm walking just myself, it's possible that if the mace is broken up into pieces, maybe I didn't come in contact, I didn't move any mace, and I didn't hover over any part of the mace. However, ta'un or rachov, but if I'm holding a load, or for that which extends beyond me, or rachov ramana wagon, it's impossible. It's impossible that Allah Lamaisa, I didn't touch something, I didn't move something, or I didn't hover over something. So furthermore, again, I'm saying, when is this true? When is this true? When is this true? So ultimately, but tumas tahom. This is talking about tumas tahom, unknown tumah. But tumah yudua, but I will say ultimately again by tumah yudua, shloshtan tameim. Interesting. Everyone's going to be tamei. In other words, both say not only am I tamei ultimately for truma, but I'm also going to be tamei for Nazir and for Karban Pesach. So again, and as what we just said before, remember again, the concept that tumas tahom does not convey tumah for Nazir or for Karban Pesach is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. But if it's tumah yedua, in other words, the grave was known, and again, like the case we saw before, the grave is laying lengthwise along the width of the road, so I definitely passed over it. So same, I'm going to be tamei for truma, I'm going to be tamei for Pesach and Nazir as well. So the Gemara says, "Vezo tumas tahom," and what is tumas tahom? Kol she'ein makira echad b'sof ha'olam. It's a corpse tumah that no one in the world knows about it. No one knows about it. Makira echad b'sof ha'olam. But if someone in the world knows about it, ein zu tumas tahom. Then it's not tumas tahom. So tumas tahom is a tumah that no one knew about until it was actually discovered. So the Gemara says, even if you have someone at the other end of the world, how you would know these things is a different discussion. But if you have someone at the end of the world who knew about this, it's not called tumas tahom. So the Gemara says, Haya tamon b'taven or b'sraros, harizeh tumas tahom. It's very, very interesting. If the body was buried under straw or under pebbles, that's tumas tahom. Biyamim uba'afelo b'nekike asela. But if it's deep in the water, right, or in a dark area, or in the cleft of a rock, Ein zu tumas tahom. This is not tumas tahom. So I will say this is actually very interesting. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about this more. And I will say, but it almost seems like what's happening over here is that halacha l'maisa, to be called tumas tahom means that it's obscured, that no one could see it. So technically speaking, if something is in the water, it could still be seen. Something's in the cleft of a rock, it can be seen. Something's in a dark place, it can be seen. Versus under straw or under pebbles, it cannot be seen. That's called tumas tahom. So the Gemara says, "V'lo amru tumas tahom elo l'meisbo." But furthermore, the concept of tumas tahom, or more importantly, I would say the kula, the leniency of tumas tahom, is only a din in tumas meis, not by other forms of tumah. So we'll say, let's just take a quick look. In the few moments that we have left, let's just take again a quick look at the Rambam. So remember again, I mentioned to you the Rambam before. So this Rambam actually starts a little bit earlier. Good. So we just read before halacha tes zayin, halacha tes vav. Sorry. In tes zayin, I will say, I'll just mention over here as follows. So that we saw before, that we saw the case of Nazir shegilach. Right, that halacha l'maisa, if the Nazir went ahead and already had his hair cutting, meaning he was totally done, in that case, halacha l'maisa. Actually, you know what we're going to do? We're going to save this halacha we're going to save the rest of these halachas for tomorrow, because we're going to continue into this sugya. For today, I just want to leave you with this one nakuda, which is the case of the Mishnah. Let's just focus on that, because we'll build out from there a little bit. But the case of the Mishnah was a Nazir who already finished everything to the point that even his shaving is done. Halacha l'maisa in that scenario, So again, if it's tumas to home, it has zero impact on him. If it's not tumas to home, then ultimately again it's soser. It's soser. Now, interesting, of course, I want to point out how much is it soser. So this point that I do want to clarify. So again, Nazir did his hair cutting, finds out there was tumah exposure. Tumah exposure. So we'll say, so now he's finished. So what does he do? So first question, what type of tumah? What type of tumah? So we'll say, so if halacha lamaisa, again, it was what we call tumah yudua, so ultimately again, the Rambam says, in betuma yudua nitma, sasr hakol. Sasr hakol. He'll have to reobserve the entire Nazirus again. That's how the Rambam paskins. Now listen to this. And I will say, so essentially what it means is, now by the way, it's not just that he observes the whole Nazirus again, essentially, he's a Nazir Tameh, right? So he has to begin the whole thing again like a Nazir Tameh. Like a Nazir Tameh. And I will say, now listen to this. What happens if it turns out again that it's Tumas to home? So again, so if it's Tumah Yedua, he's a Nazir Tameh, brings his karbanos, does the shaving, and then starts everything all over again. If it's Tumas to home, Eino Soser. Tumas to home will not do anything to him. Will not do anything to him. Why? Halach l'Moshe Misinai. Halach l'Moshe Misinai. Now, I will say that's case one. That's case one. Case two in the Mishnah. What happens, we'll say again, if, let's say he finished the calendrical duration of his Nazirus. But forget about haircutting, he hasn't even brought his karbanos yet. Then the Rambam says, Bein b'tumah yedua, bein b'tumah tom, soser akol. Like the Mishnah says, halacha l'maisa. So we'll say in this case, the calendrical duration of the Nazirus finished, but he had not yet begun his concluding rituals and rites. So no karbanos, certainly no head shaving yet. So we'll say now he finds out about tumah, whether it's tumah yedua or tumah satahom, he has to start everything all over again. Everything. So again, nizrak alav echa min adamim. If there has not yet been zrika of any of the karbanos, meaning he hasn't even done any of the karbanos yet, no deshutam, and he finds out that he's tameh, bein tumah yedua, bein tumas tahom, so sirakol. It deconstructs everything. So therefore, I will say again one more time, just bring it together. So working backwards. If the Nazir completed everything, in other words, he's already done with hair cutting, and he finds out there was a tumah exposure during the duration of his Naziros, so we ask what type of tumah. If it's tumah yedua, a regular form of tumah, known tumah, he just didn't know about it until now, so sirakol. He's effectively treated like a Nazir tameh. He has to again bring his karbanos for tumah, restart his Naziros all over again. If it's tumas tahom, he doesn't have to do anything. Why? Halach l'Moshe Misinai. But if he finds out about tumah exposure before his karbanos, even though he's finished the calendrical duration of his Nazirus, but he finds out before karbanos that Allah Ma'isa again, he was exposed to tumah, whether it's tumah yedua or tumah satahom, he has to start all over again. All right, so we'll stop over for today. We'll Emirat Hashem do more about tumas tahom, Emirat Hashem in tomorrow's daf. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there with you in person, but what an incredible schus to be able to learn with you. Shkach, everyone. Have a great, great day.